Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Law of Self-Defense Show. Glad you could be here. Come in, make yourselves comfortable. We have an interesting use of force event to talk about with all of you today. Let me make sure everything is streaming where it's supposed to be streaming. On YouTube, on Rumble, on Twitter, at Law Self-Defense, and of course, to our invaluable Law Self-Defense members on the member dashboard. So today we're going to be talking about the use of force event involving one Eric Popper from the Miami area of Florida, who did a mag dump in the course of a road rage event he found himself in, and just had the charges that have been brought against him dismissed. Those charges had been felony charges of aggravated assault and what Florida calls firing a missile. Both felony counts just dismissed last week. So I'm going to share the video of that shooting with you, share some of my own thoughts on, frankly, what might have been a more appropriate criminal charge here. Mr. Popper, in my opinion, is very fortunate not to be going to trial on felony charges. But also touch upon some of the political dynamics around stand your ground, how it's so badly misrepresented, how it's become a politicized phrase, independent of its actual legal meaning, and how that might have contributed to a political rationale for the prosecutor here to drop these charges and be able to blame it on stand your ground. Stand your ground is not popular with most prosecutors, folks, for reasons we will discuss. So come on in. As always, folks, in the course of this, if you'd like your questions answered by me live on the show, there's a couple ways to do that. If you're streaming this or watching the stream live on YouTube or Rumble, your question needs to be in the form of a $5 minimum super chat on YouTube or a $5 minimum super chat on Rumble. Or you could be a Law of Self-Defense member, get all your questions answered for free. Law of Self-Defense membership's only about 30 cents a day, and I'll answer all your questions. Just watch the stream on the Law of Self-Defense member dashboard, put your questions in the chat there, preface them, please, with the word question in caps so I can separate out the questions from the background chatter. And for 30 cents a day, you get all your questions answered. It's a pretty good deal. Less than $10 a month. A lot more cost-effective than $5 per question on YouTube or Rumble. But you folks decide for yourselves. If you'd like to become a Law of Self-Defense member, you can do that instantly right now at lawofselfdefense.com/join. Okay, what else do we have? I had a couple of other things I wanted to mention. It's become a very interesting Monday, actually. So the first is, as many of you know, I am a student of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, specifically the Gracie University School of Jiu-Jitsu, and my local professor, the instructor at my local dojo, Ray, he's down in Colorado Springs, runs the Gracie University School down there, has asked me to help promote a very special offer they're doing. Now, I explained to him that my audience is really international in scope, so only a small fraction of you would be able to take advantage of this opportunity. But essentially, he's putting on a free Gracie Jiu-Jitsu seminar, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu 101, on April 8th from 2 to 4 p.m. in Colorado Springs. There's a little square code there, or just go to GJJ for GracieJiu-Jitsu101.com. And folks, if you haven't at least tried Jiu-Jitsu, you haven't tried what I consider the single most effective and legally sound means of barehanded self-defense. So I would urge you to take advantage of this opportunity if you're anywhere in the vicinity. And even if you're not, check out the link anyway. I'm sure there's other schools as well, perhaps one close to you, that offers a similar seminar. So again, that's the free self-defense seminar, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, April 8th, 2 to 4 p.m., Colorado Springs area, GJJ101.com. The other thing I wanted to mention is, you may remember just last week, in fact, I think exactly a week ago, I did a critical review of an academic paper on U.S. self-defense law that was written by professor and attorney Marcus Funk. I would encourage you to go back. I think we published that a week ago today. Like a lot of legal scholarship, I thought it certainly had its weaknesses. I pointed those out. Of course, it had its strengths as well. And I pointed out at the time, I believe, that Dr. Funk is unbelievably credentialed. I mean, he got his law doctorate at Oxford University. He's taught at world-class universities, including currently University of Colorado School of Law. He's an attorney with Perkins Coie, one of the, I think they're a top 20 or top 50 law firm in the U.S., $1.5 billion in revenue. So very, very large firm, the kind of credentials I've never even come close to. But I did this critical review of his paper, and lo and behold, this morning, I get forwarded from my staff an email response from Dr. Funk, who apparently was sent my critical review of his paper. And it was a wonderful email. In fact, he and I are going to have lunch in a couple of weeks in Denver. He was very, very kind in his email, and exceptionally open-minded to my critique of his paper. Now, that doesn't mean he agrees with everything in my critique, and certainly he feels, and I would agree, that it would have been more productive for him and I to talk about the paper live together, except I never imagined that someone of his credentials would be interested in coming on the Law of Self-Defense show. So, and folks, I have to say, when I take a critical view of other attorneys' work, by far the most common response I get is they become incredibly defensive and hostile. And Dr. Funk's response could not be more the opposite of that. So I'm very much looking forward to having lunch with him in a couple of weeks. Hopefully it won't turn into a duel. And he offered to come on the show either to discuss this paper or anything else really as a guest on the show. And I'm certainly going to take advantage of that opportunity. So full credit to Dr. Funk for being just an utmost professional here. I really, really appreciate it. Very kind of him to do that. And of course, the last thing, today's sponsor of the show is none other than Law of Self-Defense itself. Our upcoming Law of Self-Defense Advanced class, Saturday, April 15th, 2023, the only one scheduled for this year. This is our full day live class, taught live by me, streamed to you at your computer, that teaches you how to be hard to convict, to be an unattractive target for prosecution if you're ever compelled to defend yourself, your family, your property against criminal predation. I would urge you to at least click over to the link and learn more. There's a more extensive video there where I explain the class. I explain the more than 100 very specific use of force law questions we answer in the course of the class, which you either almost certainly don't know the answers to, or what you think are the answers are mistaken. So learn more at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. And if you sign up this month, during the month of March, for that April 15th class, you get 10% off your registration. Again, that's at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. By the way, if you can't make the Saturday, April 15th date, I would encourage you to register anyway, because every student is going to receive a link to the playback version of the course. So if you can't make it Saturday, you can watch the playback version at your convenience. If you did make it Saturday, you'll still be able to review the playback version if you want to watch it again or portions of it again. It is a fire hose of information. You can also sign up for somebody else. If you have a loved one you think would benefit from the class, you can register on their behalf. Just provide us with their name when you register, and we'll make sure they get emailed the credentials they need to access the class. All right. I think that's all I needed to address in the moment. So let's talk about Mr. Eric Popper. I'm going to pull up a couple news reports here, and I'll play the video of the shooting as well, which of course will immediately get this live stream demonetized on YouTube in 3, 2, 1 seconds. Done. I have no doubt, but nothing to be done about that, I suppose, unless you want to become a Law of Self-Defense member, and then you can watch every video we do, no matter how violent, on the Law of Self-Defense dashboard. All right, so let's find the first news report, which was released about the time of this event. So this was about a year ago. Let's see, I'll make this bigger. I'll try to make it bigger. Here we go. This is from just over a year ago, January 31st, 2022. New video. So they had a little bit of a different clip. So the video most of us will be familiar with, I expect most of you have seen this before, is this video. So it's a dash camera pointed back into the vehicle from about the rear view mirror area. There is a second video apparently from the back of the car. I don't have a full version of that. It's not really important, but we'll perhaps we'll see a little bit of it in I have a live news report on this as well. But a year ago, last January 2022, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office has provided new video that is giving a better look at what happened when gunfire erupted on I-95. By the way, gunfire on I-95, Interstate 95, the Miami area, is not all that unusual, folks. The suspect claims this would be Eric Popper, the driver of this vehicle, this guy. The suspect claims he was shot at and that he has the video to prove it. The problem is state prosecutors see something completely different. Chilling dash camera video obtained by Local 10 News shows a road rage incident that led to shots being fired. The incident was first reported on last June, so it's about a year and a half ago now, when two cars were found riddled with bullets on the southbound lanes of I-95 near 135th Street. The suspect, 30-year-old Eric Popper, was driving his black Toyota Venza when new video from the rear of the vehicle shows how he abruptly cut off another driver. So I saw a little bit of this, folks. It doesn't look to me like he intentionally cut someone off. It looks to me like he's driving fairly normally, of course, at higher than the speed limit. Everybody in I-95 on that stretch is, if you drove the speed limit, you'd get run over. But everyone else, he's going with the flow of traffic. And it really appears to me that a car comes up behind him at a much, much higher rate of speed. Eric Popper does basically a normal lane change and inadvertently cuts off the other vehicle because of the speed of approach of the other vehicle. That's my perception. In any case, that driver, the second driver, began to tailgate Popper, who is then seen slamming on his brakes. So he does what's colloquially called a brake check on the person tailgating him. Folks, I understand the sentiment that might lead you to want to do that. It's dangerous for someone to tailgate you. They're clearly just attempting to intimidate you. It's easy to get our egos involved. It's hard to think of a better way to get in a road rage incident than to start brake checking someone. Just get out of the way, folks. Let them go by. That's the smart play. But he does brake check him. And in an interview just last week, after he learned the charges were dropped, Eric Popper himself says, well, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't do that. The article continues, according to state troopers, seconds after that, the brake check, the driver pulls up to the passenger side of Popper's car and throws a water bottle at it. Now, we'll see the second car pull up, passing Popper's car, passing Popper on the right, by the way. And we hear a kind of a slamming, banging type of sound. Popper says he believed he was being shot at, still believes he was being shot at. The state police say, well, no, that was a water bottle. Well, you can't see a water bottle or a gunshot in the video. And how would the state police know it was a water bottle? They weren't there. Are we supposed to believe they recovered a crushed water bottle off I-95 miles back from when the cars pulled over? I think the state police are just inferring, speculating that it was a water bottle. Maybe they interviewed the passengers of the other vehicle and they said, no, sir, no, officer, we didn't fire a shot at Eric Popper. We just threw a water bottle. Does that mean they only threw a water bottle? No, of course not. Right? They would lie in their own self-interest. By the way, does it matter if it was a gunshot or a water bottle? Not for use of force law purposes. For use of force law purposes to justify Eric Popper's defensive use of force, what needs to be in place? Well, the 5 elements of self-defense, right? Innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. Up to 5 of those. We'll talk about those in more detail in the context of this case in a moment. But the relevant legal question here for Eric Popper is, did Eric Popper reasonably perceive a gunshot fired at his vehicle? Doesn't have to have been a gunshot. It just has to have been a reasonable perception under the totality of the circumstances. And as I say, gunshots fired on I-95 around Miami are not all that unusual. He sees a road rage incident developing. He concerned enough that he retrieves his pistol from the center console of his car. He's holding it in his hand, and then the other car aggressively goes to pass him, gets beside him, banging sound. Yeah, I think you could argue he had a reasonable perception that he was being shot at, perhaps. And that's a perception the state would have to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, having said that, and we'll go into the legal dynamics here more in a moment, the manner in which Eric Popper defended himself is extremely concerning and could well cost him a self-defense justification by itself. But again, we'll circle back to that in a moment. Let's see. According to state troopers, seconds after that, the driver pulls up to the passenger side of Popper's car and throws a water bottle at it. That's when Popper quickly started shooting right through his own car windows. Yeah, he shoots through the passenger side window and the windshield of his car. Video captures the other driver speeding away. Local 10 News, Roy Ramos went to Popper's home to get his side of the story, but no one answered the door. Yeah, don't ever talk to the media, folks. That would be crazy. Popper's lawyer said his client was defending himself. On the video, you can hear and see the other driver shoot his car, said attorney Robert Gershman. Well, I can't see that, but whatever. When it's clear something does hit Popper's car, state troopers say it was not a bullet. Upon hearing the sound, Mr. Popper then shoots back in self-defense, pulls over, and calls 911, said Gershman, his lawyer. Fortunately, there were no reported injuries. Yeah, that's a big saving grace here. Injuries by anybody, including innocent bystanders. This was a crowded roadway, folks. Lots of other vehicles driving along. Popper ultimately turned himself into Florida Highway Patrol and was arrested. He's now facing 2 felony charges: aggravated assault with a firearm and firing a deadly missile. The firing the deadly missile thing is just Florida's way of criminalizing essentially drive-by shooting. So if you fire a deadly missile from a car or into a car, it's its own felony charge. Unless, of course, it could be justified as lawful self-defense, as we expect here. Popper has since bonded out of jail, but if convicted, he could face a maximum sentence of 15 years for each of his charges. And if this was being charged under 1020 life, in those 15-year penalty sentences would be served consecutively. Now, aggravated assault's been taken off the list of enumerated felonies for purposes of 1020 life. I don't remember if it had already been removed in June of 2021 when this event occurred. I think it had been, in which case 1020 life wouldn't apply to that aggravated assault charge. I'm not even sure if the firing a deadly missile charge is one of the enumerated 1020 life. I'd have to take a look. Sorry, I didn't bother to do that because the charges have been dismissed. So let's take a look now at this week's news report on this. And this one reads, charges dropped against a man arrested for road rage shooting on I-95. This is from March 10th. So that would be last Friday, 5:42 p.m. By the way, that suggests, of course, that that's roughly the time that the state attorney's office, the prosecutors, released the news that they were dropping the charges. When you release news late on a Friday, folks, that means you don't really want it particularly noticed because you know it'll get buried by the time you get to next week. So this article reads, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office has dismissed charges against the man who opened fire from his car in 1995 nearly 2 years ago. Eric Popper said he had been tailgated on the highway on his way to work in June of 2021. Chilling dash camera video obtained by Local 10 News shows Popper slamming on his brakes, then opening fire seconds later. Florida Highway Patrol trooper said the other driver then hurled a water bottle towards Popper's Toyota Venza. They really care about the model of Popper's car, the make and model. But Popper maintains it was gunfire. I've watched the video many times, did not see a water bottle, he said. Oh, I don't see a water bottle either. I also don't see gunfire. And then things start getting interesting because we start hearing about stand your ground law. And this is what I really wanted to talk about today. Stand your ground law. How is stand your ground relevant to this use of force event? Well, properly understood, stand your ground law is not relevant for purposes for reasons I'll discuss in a moment. But for political purposes, stand your ground is being brought into the conversation. And why would that be? That's mostly what we'll talk about today. So the attorney says, I think under the stand your ground law, Mr. Popper was perfectly reasonable and justified in his action, said Robert Gershman, the attorney representing Popper. So first of all, full credit to Attorney Gershman. He got these very serious felony charges against his client dismissed. Win. That's 100% win every day of the week, twice on Sunday. Good work for your client, Attorney Gershman. This representation of stand your ground law tells me he doesn't really understand stand your ground law. Sorry, that's just the way it is. He continues, there was no question when you look and listen to the facts of the case, Mr. Popper was shot at. Well, I think there is a question, actually. There was no bullet hole in his car, other than the ones he put there, of course. Popper said he is ready to move forward with his life. He writes, he says, hindsight is 2020. There are always things we can look back and say we wish we could have done differently. Definitely I would be to not have pumped my brakes. I would have taken another tactic, definitely try to de-escalate a little better. That's good. I would encourage that too. And then I have a little news video here that basically repeats this this news report. It's only about a minute long, so let's go ahead and enjoy this.
Right now at 5:30 and only on 10, charges have been dropped against this guy who was reported by his own dash cam opening fire on another driver on I-95. His own dash.
So that's the other car. That's the, let's call it the bad guy car, just for purposes of discussion. And my sense when I see this car, so these are out of sequence. Here the shots are being fired. We're going to see the clip of the other car pulling up behind Eric Popper. That obviously happened before the shots were fired. But you can see, or at least it seems to me, the other car is coming up really fast when Eric Popper changes lanes in front of it. I don't think he's deliberately cutting it off or even carelessly cutting it off. Really, I think the other car is coming up at an unusually high rate of speed.
Charges have been dropped against this guy who was reported by his own dash cam opening fire on another driver on I-95. The defendant. And
then you can see how the car gets pissed and starts lunging forward, right? Tailgating and lunging forward.
Opening fire on another driver on I-95. The defendant has been against.
In fairness, that might have been the brake check.
This guy who was reported by his own dash cam opening fire on another driver on I-95. The defendant has maintained he thought he was being shot at, and that's why he grabbed his gun.
Today, that stand your ground defense led to all charges being dismissed.
Okay, there's no such thing as a stand your ground defense. It's just self-defense. All right, there's no this representation of stand your ground as some weird alternative parallel way of justifying the use of force is nonsense. You're just arguing self-defense, period. What stand your ground does, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, is of the up to 5 elements required for a claim of self-defense, stand your ground relieves you of the element of avoidance. It relieves you of an otherwise existing legal duty to retreat, if safely possible, before you can defend yourself. So where normally you'd have 5 points of attack, 5 elements of attack for a prosecutor who wants to defeat your claim of self-defense, in a stand your ground jurisdiction, there's only 4. There's innocence, imminence, proportionality, and reasonableness, because avoidance is off the table in an otherwise lawful case of self-defense. But you're still arguing self-defense. It's just a 4-element version of self-defense instead of a 5-element version. You're not arguing stand your ground. You're still arguing that you were the innocent victim of an imminent, unlawful use of deadly force against you. It's just self-defense without the avoidance element. That's all.
Lieutenant Janine Stanwood is live with that one and only exclusive. Janine.
Florida Highway Patrol says the other driver had actually thrown a water bottle toward Eric Popper, but you said it. He has maintained the whole time that was gunfire, and now the charges against him have been dropped. This chilling video made national headlines. The man firing out the window, Eric Popper, faced charges including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
I'm very relieved.
He should be very relieved. He was looking at a long time in prison, or at best, even if he was acquitted, which is no certainty, a very, very expensive legal defense with a lot of risk of a long time in prison.
I believe that justice was served.
But now he's speaking to us as prosecutors dismiss those charges.
It's been a long process. It's been almost 2 years.
It happened in June of 2021.
According to Florida Highway Patrol, Popper was behind the wheel of this black Toyota Venza when he cuts off another driver. That driver starts tailgating. Popper slams the brakes. Troopers say the other driver then hurls a water bottle. Popper maintains it was gunfire.
I've watched the video many times. Did not see a water bottle.
I think under the stand your ground law, Mr. Popper was perfectly reasonable.
I don't even know what that means, under the stand your ground law. So stand your ground did not create self-defense in the state of Florida. Stand your ground was adopted. The statute was adopted, I believe, 2005. Florida's had a self-defense law just like every other state forever. Again, all the stand your ground statute did was relieve a defender of the element of avoidance in an otherwise lawful case of self-defense. So there's no stand your ground justification. It's just self-defense.
Justified in his actions. There was no question when you look and listen to the facts of the case. Mr. Popper,
he wasn't going fast.
Shot at.
We asked
miles an hour?
Popper if he had any regrets.
Hindsight's 20/20. There's always things that we can look back and say we wish we would have done differently. Definitely what I would have done would be not to pump my brakes. I would have taken another tactic, or definitely tried to
What's the mission, folks? The mission's to get home alive, right? Do you improve the prospects for accomplishing that mission by brake checking people on the road, no matter how much of a jerk they're being? Or do you decrease the prospects for getting home alive? Because you don't know who that person is. You don't know how crazy they are. Maybe they will shoot at you. Over what? For what? Just get out of the way.
escalate a little better.
Popper says he wouldn't have changed what happened next, opening fire. He says he was in fear for his life. Now he says he's looking forward to moving on.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. All right, so let's take a look now at the full video of Popper. Let's see. That is this from the camera inside the vehicle around the rear view mirror area, from beginning to end. It's only about a minute long. By the way, this should be a lesson to all of us, folks. From the moment he, I think, inadvertently cuts off the other vehicle to when he's firing rounds through the windows of his own car at that vehicle, it's a minute. It's 63 seconds. That's how fast these things can develop. Are you ready to get in a gunfight in the next 63 seconds? All right, so here we go with the complete video from beginning to end.
Oh my God.
Other car pulls up behind him, is tailgating, blares the horn. Brake check, don't do that. Other car keeps tailgating. It's kind of hard to see, but you can just see it moving through a little split of the window back there. He's getting nervous now. He's got a little lockbox in his console. Working the combination. Not a very quick way to get a gun out, folks. But he does a pretty good job. The other car attempts to pass him on the right. Can't make it. He's blocking traffic. Goes back to tailgating. He's got his gun in hand. Don't touch yourself, dude. Other car still tailgating. Now he's going to pass again. The other car comes up on the right. With a bang. If he believes was a gunshot, Florida Highway Patrol believes was the road. And he keeps his gun to slide lock. Now it looks like he's going to go do a reload. So here's my concern with this. He was charged with aggravated assault and firing a missile from a vehicle, essentially 2 felonies. Let's imagine, for argument's sake, that he had a reasonable fear of imminent, unlawful, deadly force attack from that other vehicle, so that his firing of his gun at the other vehicle would have been legally justified. You have to keep in mind, folks, that one of those 5 elements is reasonableness. Your use of force has to be reasonable, meaning, in part, not a speculative fear driving your use of force, but also your use of force has to be non-reckless. Non-reckless. What is recklessness? Recklessness is the unjustified creation of a risk of death to other persons, innocent persons, and just the creation of that risk is recklessness by itself. And of course, if you manage to kill someone, then it would be a reckless homicide, a criminal homicide. And there are non-reckless and reckless ways to discharge a gun in self-defense. Now, the example I typically use to illustrate this is normally, if you're discharging a gun in self-defense, you're shooting at another human being out in public, there's always a possibility, in fact, it's not that uncommon, that a round misses or a round hits but overpenetrates. And that round, this happens a lot in police shootings, right? Police hits of shots fired is about 30%. So 2/3 or more of the rounds are just going downrange. And sometimes they strike other people, innocent bystanders. So what happens if you're firing your gun in otherwise lawful self-defense at an aggressor and one of those rounds misses or overpenetrates and strikes an innocent bystander? What's your criminal liability with respect to that other bystander? Well, we have a legal doctrine called transferred intent. And transferred intent is normally applied in a negative sense, meaning you had a bad intent. And that bad intent carries over from your intended target to the innocent bystander target. So by bad intent, I say, imagine you're not acting in self-defense. Imagine you're just an armed robber. And you approach a victim, you display your gun, you say, give me all your goods. And they decide to pull their own gun and defend themselves. Lawfully so. So you see them pulling their own gun, you start shooting at them. You're intending to shoot them. So you have criminal intent towards them. But one of your rounds misses and goes on to strike a bystander. Well, you never had innocent intent toward that bystander. You may not even have known the other bystander existed, was present. But what the law says is your bad intent, your criminal intent towards your intended victim carries over to the unintended victim. Transferred intent. The bad intent transfers over. Well, the same concept applies in the positive sense, meaning if your firing of the shots was lawful self-defense, it was justified, well, then the good intent also transfers, meaning that you lacked criminal intent for the person, the aggressor you were shooting at to defend yourself lawfully. That lack of criminal intent, the lack of it transfers over to the bystander. So you didn't have criminal intent towards the bystander either. So there ought be no criminal liability. It's unfortunate bad luck. But that kind of protection you get from that legal doctrine of transferred intent requires that the shots you fired were fired reasonably in a non-reckless manner. If you're firing in a reckless manner, you don't get the benefit of transferred intent because recklessness is itself a criminal state of mind. And the example I would always give is if you're defending yourself with your handgun and there's, you're not out on the ocean, you're not deep in the woods, you're in a normal setting where other people can also, bystanders might be expected to be around, and you pull your gun and then you cover your eyes and you just do a mag dump in the general area of the aggressor. Well, a reasonable person would expect some of those rounds are going to miss, go on to potentially harm other people. That would be recklessly firing a firearm. That's different than if you bring the gun up, you have a sight picture, or even just a flash sight picture, even just the silhouette of the back of the gun on the target. You're doing something to direct the rounds as specifically as you can under the circumstances at the aggressor target that you're trying to neutralize in lawful self-defense. That's non-reckless. But if you close your eyes and fire in the general direction, especially when you know there's innocent bystanders around, that begins to look a lot like reckless. And reckless endangerment with a firearm, folks, is typically a felony. And if you manage to kill someone, it's going to be a reckless homicide, a form of involuntary manslaughter, much like Alec Baldwin is facing involuntary manslaughter for his reckless homicide of Helena Hutchins down in New Mexico. And I see this come up very often in dog cases where someone is a gun owner carrying a concealed weapon, lawfully is walking their dog, and they and their dog are attacked by some other dog on the street. Typically, it's a pit bull kind of thing, but whatever. We don't need to get into that at the moment. But the gun owner says, well, I have to protect my dog, and I have to protect myself, and they fire a warning shot into the ground, up in the air, and they end up getting charged with reckless endangerment because they're in a community. and the bullets skip off the ground. Bullets fired into the air come down eventually. And the law says, well, that was not a reasonable use of defensive force. If you thought you needed to shoot the dog to defend yourself, you should have shot the dog. Firing around into the ground or up in the air is reckless. You're creating an unjustified risk of death to an innocent person. That's recklessness. That's a criminal state of mind. You're recklessly endangering the public. That's reckless endangerment with a gun, typically a felony. But what about here? What do we see here? What's going on? I think I'm not saying this is the case. I can think of, certainly I could come up with defense lawyer arguments to the contrary. But this manner of discharging the gun, and I'll just kind of slow roll through it here. There's a lot of, here we go, starts now. There's a lot of eyes closed. I mean, what is this here? This is no effort. He doesn't know where that gun's aimed at. He doesn't have any particular target in mind. I guarantee you it's loud in that car. I fired handguns inside cars before. It's really loud, especially with all the windows rolled up. But does this look like a reasonable, non-reckless discharge of a firearm in self-defense? Now, of course, everything's happening very quickly. All these shots are fired off in just a few seconds under the totality of the circumstances. But man, it doesn't look good to me. I would at least want to be looking at what it was I was firing my gun at. Certainly not looking away with my eyes closed. And there's a lot of this. I mean, maybe he's looking there. Could you argue a flash sight picture there? Maybe. I don't know. He doesn't look like he's looking there. Gun's still going. Now his hand's off the steering wheel. Eyes are closed again. Still firing. Not yet at slide lock. Another shot there. So, yeah, I would suggest he's very fortunate they decided not to pursue a reckless endangerment charge here. He's really lucky. None of those rounds hit an innocent bystander. And he's not looking at involuntary manslaughter for the manner in which he discharged his weapon. So that would be my main concern here in terms of his legal liability. Now, what's going on with all these claims of stand your ground law? Well, again, folks, for any claim of self-defense, any claim, by the way, you can get this cheat sheet for free. We make this for free. It's the 5 elements of self-defense. There's only up to 5 elements of a claim of self-defense, no matter what state you're in, no matter what U.S. territory you're in. Innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. This cheat sheet provides a brief description of each. It's free, folks. It's just a PDF download. You can get this at lawofselfdefense.com/elements. Now, I say there's up to these 5 elements because not all 5 elements are required all the time. 1 or more elements can be legally waived, and then it's not required. And all 5 of these should be thought of as targets of attack for a prosecutor because these are cumulative, these elements. Whichever of the 5 elements are required elements, meaning if any one of them is missing, if any one of them can be disproven beyond a reasonable doubt, you don't just diminish your legal defense of self-defense. It collapses. You don't have a legal defense of self-defense if it's missing one of the required elements. So the prosecutor knows if he's in a self-defense case, his job is to defeat one of these elements, to disprove any one of them. He doesn't have to disprove your claim of self-defense in its entirety. He has to disprove any one of the required elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And if he can do that, your claim of self-defense collapses. And then he has an easy conviction because, of course, when you argue self-defense, you're not saying it wasn't me, I was someplace else. You're saying the opposite of that. You're saying it was me. I shot that guy. But I did it with the legal justification of self-defense. But if you lose one of the required elements, you don't have a claim of self-defense. And then all that's left of that statement is a confession. That's a pretty easy conviction. So the prosecutor knows this. So he's targeting the elements, at least one of them, for disproof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if all 5 elements are required, he has 5 targets of attack. Now, in stand your ground states, avoidance has to do with whether or not you have a legal duty to retreat, if possible, with complete safety before you can use deadly force in self-defense. In the stand your ground states, avoidance is not required. It's legally waived. It's taken off the table in an otherwise lawful case of self-defense. In the duty to retreat states, avoidance is still required. In the duty to retreat states, if you could have retreated with complete safety, you're required to do that before you can use deadly force in self-defense. And if you fail to meet that duty, you lose the required element of avoidance and you lose self-defense. In the stand your ground states, avoidance is not normally required. So it's not a target of attack by the prosecution. And of course, stand your ground has become highly politicized and misrepresented by the people who are highly politicizing it. In particular, as you might imagine, prosecutors in general don't like stand your ground. Why? Well, we've already said, right? If stand your ground does not exist, then there are 5 points of attack for a prosecutor, one of which is that element of avoidance. If stand your ground is the law, there's only 4 points of attack for a prosecutor. Avoidance is off the table. That's not good for a prosecutor. They want more points of attack, not fewer points of attack. And in effect, what the duty to retreat states are saying, the ones that require avoidance, is they're saying, listen, even if you meet all the other elements, innocence, imminence, proportionality, and reasonableness, meaning even if you were the innocent victim of an unlawful, imminent, deadly force attack and everything you do is reasonable, we reserve the right to put you in a cage for the rest of your life if we can convince the jury you had a safe avenue of retreat and didn't take advantage of it. We reserve that point of attack, that element of avoidance. The stand your ground states take the opposite position. They say, listen, if you meet the other 4 elements, if you are the innocent victim of an unlawful, imminent, deadly force attack and you conduct yourself reasonably, we're not going to put you in a cage for the rest of your life simply because somebody might have thought or tried to argue that you had a completely safe avenue of retreat. The 4 elements is enough without avoidance. That's enough to justify your use of deadly defensive force. And really, if you think about it, I mean, do we really need avoidance at all? Because we still have, even in a stand your ground state, if avoidance is off the table, we still require imminence. We still require that the threat you're defending yourself is either in progress or immediately about to occur. And if it's a deadly force threat, as we're talking about here, and it's in progress or immediately about to occur, is it rational that you would also have a completely safe avenue of retreat? So if you meet the conditions of imminence, which is still required in stand your ground states, doesn't that kind of automatically take avoidance off the table? Because you only ever have a legal duty to retreat if you can do it with complete safety. You're never required to increase your jeopardy, especially if retreat's not possible. You can't have a legal duty to do something that's not possible. So I would suggest that really the elements of imminence and avoidance ought to be considered redundant. You don't need both. But I can tell you, in the duty to retreat states that require that element of avoidance, that's the favorite target of attack by prosecutors. They love that element of avoidance. They love being able to argue to a jury that you could have safely retreated, you didn't, therefore they should deny you self-defense as a legal justification. I've seen them bring in like oak tag boards, posters with a schematic of the scene of the fight with little red arrows all around the border. And they'll say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, every one of these red arrows would have been a completely safe avenue of retreat. All 30 of them, 40 of them, however many they put on the poster. Now, maybe the defendant wasn't aware of all of them. Maybe the defendant wasn't aware of most of them. But surely the defendant was aware that at least one of them was a safe avenue of retreat, and he failed to take advantage of it. Instead, he chose to kill. And for that reason, you should deny this defendant self-defense and convict them. In the stand your ground states, that argument is off the table. So what do we do in Florida? Florida's a stand your ground state. By the way, folks, you know what percentage of states are stand your ground states? Because if you read the media reports, you'd think Florida was some weird aberration. Oh, the strange Florida and its stand your ground law. How odd. About 80% of states are stand your ground states, folks. It's by far the large majority. Roughly 40 states are stand your ground states, including states you might not expect, like California. Perhaps the most aggressive stand your ground state in the country is California. Jurors in California are instructed that not only can the defendant in that California courtroom Not only can that defendant stand his ground, that defendant can pursue his aggressor if necessary for his safety. Pretty good. Now, you won't find a California statute on stand your ground. Of the roughly 40 stand your ground states, about half of them are stand your ground by statute. The legislature passed a law, the governor signed it, became stand your ground, no longer require avoidance in an otherwise lawful case of self-defense. But about half the stand your ground states are stand your ground by case law, by court-made law, by appellate court decisions. California is an example of that. So there is no California stand your ground statute. But stand your ground is found in the jury instructions because it comes from California appellate court decisions dating all the way back to the 1800s. And it's still valid California law. So stand your ground is actually by far the majority position in America. It's only about 10 states that still impose a legal duty to retreat. Most of those are the kind of states you'd expect, like Maryland, Massachusetts, New York. So there you go. But when you're arguing self-defense in a stand your ground state, you're not arguing stand your ground. You're just arguing self-defense. Self-defense without the element of avoidance. You still have to have the other four elements, folks. If the prosecutor can effectively attack, disprove beyond a reasonable doubt, the other four still required elements, innocence, imminence, proportionality, or reasonableness, well, then he's destroyed your claim of self-defense. He just doesn't have avoidance any longer as a target of attack. Let's see what else I wanted to address about that. Oh, the trouble, of course, with recklessness is, by definition, recklessness, shooting the gun with your eyes closed while you're facing a different direction. Recklessness is by definition not reasonable. Reasonableness remains one of the elements of self-defense. So recklessness is a criminal state of mind, mens rea. And it strips you of the legal justification of self-defense because you fail the element of reasonableness. Now, on a related note, I should mention that in most of the stand your ground states, there is still a backdoor way for a prosecutor to attack your failure to retreat. So you're in a stand your ground state, and the prosecutor, there is no element of avoidance. There's no legal duty to retreat before you can use deadly force in otherwise lawful self-defense. The prosecutor in most stand your ground states can still make this argument. They can say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this defendant didn't have any legal duty to retreat. We're a proud stand your ground states here in our jurisdiction. But you know what? This defendant could have safely retreated, and a reasonable defendant would have safely retreated, and therefore this defendant's failure to retreat is a failure of reasonableness. You should deny him that element of reasonableness, find it disproven beyond a reasonable doubt, and deny him self-defense as a justification. So it's a backdoor way to attack your failure to safely retreat through the element of reasonableness instead of through the element of avoidance, which is off the table in a stand your ground state. Now, there are 6 or 8 states that I refer to as the hard stand your ground states. So, less than a third of the total number of stand your ground states, but there's a handful of states, 6 or 8, that are hard stand your ground states. And in those states, the finder of fact, normally the jury in a jury trial or the judge in a bench trial, the jury instructions read that the finder of fact is not even allowed to consider the possibility of retreat in evaluating the reasonableness of the defender's use of force. So in those hard stand your ground states, avoidance is really taken off the table. There's no longer that backdoor attack on your failure to retreat through the element of reasonableness, because the finder of fact is told they can't consider it. If they can't consider it, it's not a relevant fact for the prosecutor to argue to. Texas is one of those. There's a few states that are hard stand your ground states. By the way, if you come to our Saturday, April 15th, Law Self-Defense Advanced course, we cover all of this in great detail. That course is applicable to all 50 states. So we would list all the hard stand your ground states there for you, so you'd know whether or not you're in one. What else did I want to touch upon there? Maybe it'll come to me. I forgot. There was an additional point I wanted to make, but now it's not coming to me. All right, folks. So I'm going to turn to the questions now. Again, as I said at the beginning, If you're watching this live on YouTube, you have a question you'd like me to answer, it needs to be a $5 super chat minimum. If you're watching on Rumble, $5 Rumble rant minimum. If you're a Law Self-Defense member, just put your questions in the chat and I'll answer them for free. Part of your membership. Membership's only about 30 cents a day, folks. Less than $10 a month. You can become a member right now. This instant, open up another tab on your browser, go to lawofselfdefense.com/join, become a member, ask as many questions as you want every month for less than 30 cents a day, roughly 30 cents a day, instead of $5 a question on YouTube or Rumble. And of course, you're also supporting our ongoing efforts here at Law of Self-Defense. Again, you can do that at lawofselfdefense.com/join. So I'm going to turn to first our member dashboard. By the way, if you notice in that video, there are a lot of other cars around. Let me see if I can find it again. So we see here at the beginning, look, there's cars everywhere, right? If this was, there are some stretches of I-95, which runs all up and down the East Coast, of course. But there's long stretches of I-95 where there's not a lot of traffic. You're kind of out in the boonies. And if you were firing your gun in the way he did, and there was nobody else around except for the aggressor, arguably that would not be reckless conduct because there's no one towards whom you're creating a reckless, unjustified risk of death. But here, there's plenty of other vehicles around. And yeah, he's damn lucky. He's damn lucky he didn't hit somebody. An innocent bystander. All right, so let's turn to the Law of Self-Defense chat on the member dashboard. Hey, folks, all the usual suspects in the chat. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, for everybody else, please, if you're on YouTube, we're approaching 50,000 subscribers. It would be great to get to that point. So if you're not yet subscribed, if you could hit the subscribe button, that would be great. Make sure it's, it's sometimes YouTube unsubscribes you without telling you. So you might want to double check that. If you hit the thumbs up button on YouTube, that's greatly appreciated. If you leave a comment on YouTube, even if it's just your city and state, again, that helps fool the algorithm a bit. And do all the same things on Rumble as well. That's greatly appreciated. Let's see. George in New York asks, Law Self-Defense member George asks, question, what if he hit someone else in the bad guy's car? That's if the driver of the bad car had fired shots. You mean like if there was an innocent passenger in the car? And if we assume that Eric Popper was justified in firing at the car at all, maybe only the driver was the bad actor. That's where that transferred intent would come in. So if he was firing responsibly, but happened to hit a passenger in the bad guy's car, that transferred good intent. The round intended for the genuine, legitimate target of the driver, fired in an otherwise reasonable, non-reckless way, happens to hit a passenger in the car. That's really on the aggressor driver, not on Eric Popper, if he fired responsibly. Oh, so yeah. So why would they have dropped the charges? Well, sometimes the prosecutor, it's entirely within the prosecutor's discretion if they want to bring the case to trial or not. But one thing that might have been a factor here is sometimes prosecutors who don't like self-defense laws will take kind of a politically energized case or charges, and maybe they don't feel super strong about bringing it to trial. Maybe the people in the other car were all felons, for example, and that might be revealed if they brought Eric Popper to trial. Maybe there were guns found in the other car. Maybe the other car was stolen. I mean, there might have been facts here we're not aware of that would make a prosecutor feel like they didn't have a great chance of winning a trial if they actually went full force against Eric Popper. And they don't like to take a loss. Prosecutors are graded on their win-loss record. They like to have about a 95% or better win record. So they don't like to take vulnerable cases to trial. Vulnerable meaning vulnerable from the prosecutor's perspective. There's a good chance they'll lose the case at trial. So there may have been disincentives to bring the case to trial anyway. But rather than talk about those, the prosecutor, who hates stand your ground because it takes away one of their targets for attack, says, yeah, we know this shooting looks crazy, but we got to drop it because of that bad stand your ground law. That guy raised a stand your ground defense. There's nothing we can do. Stand your ground is stopping us from pursuing justice in this case. Did that play a role here in deciding to drop the charges? Wouldn't surprise me in the least. I think much the same happened when we had that the case. I think it was in Missouri where the firefighter was shot by the bad guy's girlfriend. Right, she picks up the bad guy's gun, shoots the firefighter dead. Prosecutor there decides not to bring charges and blames it on Missouri's self-defense law. By the way, in this particular case, remember, all stand your ground does is remove an otherwise legal existing duty to retreat. That's all stand your ground does. And you only ever have a legal duty to retreat anyway if retreat could have been possible with complete safety. When we look at this Eric Popper video, did he have an opportunity to retreat with complete safety based on his reasonable perceptions of events? He's driving down the interstate at 60 miles an hour. The car's tailgating him. It pulls up beside him. Where was his opportunity for completely safe retreat? So if he didn't have an opportunity for completely safe retreat anyway, even if Florida had been a duty to retreat state, he still wouldn't have been obliged to attempt retreat, because you're not obliged to attempt retreat if it increases your jeopardy. So really, on the facts of this case, he may have made other mistakes, like the arguable recklessness and the manner in which he fired the gun. But simply on the facts of this case, stand your ground's irrelevant, because stand your ground would only be relevant if you would have had a legal duty, and stand your ground relieves you of that legal duty. But I don't see how Eric Popper would have had a legal duty to attempt retreat here anyway. So stand your ground really is completely irrelevant. So when the prosecutor's pointing to it as an excuse for not bringing charges, that's not a legally meritorious reason not to bring charges here. That strikes me as a politically motivated reason not to bring charges, to taint stand your ground in the public eye. This is what stand your ground allows, this kind of crazy thing. And by the way, we see a bunch of that. I forgot I'd pulled this up, but we see a bunch of this in the Twitter commentary on all this. Now, I do caution that a lot of Twitter consists of bots and propaganda accounts that are paid for by political activists. So let's see if I can. Yeah, this is it. And often these are accounts with relatively no follower numbers. Now, this particular account, 50 Shades of Way, has a lot of followers, 280,000 followers, describes himself as a freelance reporter. But of course, he's a journalist. So journalists aren't, to put it mildly, not the smartest class of human beings you'll ever find. And what does 50 Shades of Way have to say here? In June 2021, Eric Popper got into a road rage incident, fired his gun at someone. The Miami-Dade State's Attorney's Office just dropped the charges against him. And then he writes, this is his opinion: in a stand your ground state, you can lose your temper and fire your gun for no reason. Is that what you're allowed to do in a stand your ground state? Lose your temper and fire your gun for no reason, and stand your ground justifies that? No, folks. What does stand your ground do? It takes away the element of avoidance. Period. That's all it does. For your use of force, for your firing of the gun to be justified, you still have to have the other four elements. You still have to be the innocent victim of an unlawful, imminent, deadly force attack and conduct yourself reasonably. Let's see. Oh, here's a lot more. 50 Shades Away. According to several studies, stand your ground laws are tied to an increase in homicides. Okay, so I've looked at some of these studies, and by and large, they don't know what stand your ground is. They have a profoundly defective understanding of what stand your ground means. They think it's some parallel way to justify use of force. They don't understand it's just self-defense minus one element. And so if you don't understand the definition of the law you're attempting to study, obviously anything that comes out of your study is going to be garbage, right? It's like doing a study on cars, but you're unable to differentiate a car from a plane, from a motorcycle, from a horse. You're not going to get very good findings. But let's pretend they knew what stand your ground meant. And let's pretend that stand your ground actually resulted in an increase in homicides. Good Lord, an increase in homicides. Something must be done. Well, folks, guess what? Not all homicides are a bad thing. Homicide just means one person killed another person. Sometimes that is a bad thing. Sometimes it's a crime. Sometimes it's murder or manslaughter or reckless homicide. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes a homicide is legally justified as self-defense. And you might imagine that if you make it easier for people to act in lawful self-defense by reducing the number of elements available to attack for a prosecutor, you might imagine then that law-abiding people might resort to lawful self-defense more often. And that lawful self-defense might involve a gun and might involve the death of the person attempting to rob them or rape them or murder them. And when that lawful citizen lawfully defends themselves and their aggressor dies, that's a homicide. Was that a bad thing? Or would we prefer the armed robber, the rapist, the murderer have won? So homicides are not inherently a bad thing, and stand your ground. Increasing the number of homicides is not inherently a bad thing. It rather depends on who is doing the dying, right? I mean, that's why we have guns for personal protection in the first place, because we may be compelled to use deadly defensive force to protect ourselves, our family, or in Texas, our property. So again, misunderstanding of all these laws and homicides, or misunderstanding, arguably misrepresentation, deliberate misrepresentation, propagandizing. This stuff is not rocket science. I think all these people would know this if they wanted to. I think they do know it if they want to. They just want to propagandize the matter of stand your ground is all. And this guy points out a counterpoint to this claim. You just take what confirms your hypothesis. From the same article, quote, several state-level studies using more recent data identified only uncertain associations of stand your ground laws with homicide rates. Close quote. I actually don't care whether stand your ground laws increase homicides or not. Generally speaking, if stand your ground laws make it easier for otherwise law-abiding people to defend themselves against lethal attack, I'm 100% for it. And I believe stand your ground does exactly that, which is why I support stand your ground. It should be the law everywhere. All right, so back to the law self-defense dashboard. Let's see. Paul, law self-defense member Paul comments, this guy could have avoided this by getting out of his way when he saw him coming or speeding up beforehand to get out of his way. Brake checking was the first stupid thing. Yeah, brake checking is an idiotic thing to do. Don't do that, folks. I don't think it strips you of your privilege to act in self-defense, but it's just don't be getting into fights you don't need to be getting into. St. Paul says, I would argue he was the initial aggressor by brake checking the other driver. Well, when we talk about being the initial aggressor, so being the initial aggressor loses you the element of innocence. But when we talk about being the initial aggressor for use of force purposes, it needs to be in a manner where you have a reasonable expectation that violence is going to result. And there's lots of brake checking that doesn't result in violence. Now, I think it's imprudent because I think any increase in the risk of violence is not worth it. But I'm not sure brake checking would rise to the level of stripping someone of self-defense. Let's see. Somebody comments. I said, journalists are not the brightest. Asked, do you want to explain why many lawyers come from this college area? I don't think a lot of lawyers come out of journalism schools. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. All right, let's take a look and see if there's any super chats that need to be addressed. Let me stop that. Oops, that's not the right thing. Hold on. But it wouldn't surprise me if a prosecutor were to make that argument that Eric Popper was the initial aggressor in this confrontation by brake checking the other car, and therefore, as the initial aggressor, he should lose the element of innocence and lose the privilege of self-defense. If I were the prosecutor and wanted to take this case to trial, that's the argument I would be making, for sure. Let's see. Holly Ozone, $10 super chat. Thank you very much. Writes, always appreciate your view and glad you survived those drinks at the Vegas meetup. That was a long night. I mean, I didn't know it was a long night because I was having so much fun. But when I looked at my clock and it was 6 a.m. and we were still at the Venetian drinking, wow. That was a long day the next day too. All right, Lobo McNasty, $5 super chat. Thank you very much. It looks like one of his windows broke prior to firing, as if someone was shot first. Does it look like that? Let's see. No, it doesn't look that way to me. This is I mean, this is not a very good image because my text is blocking the view of his gun. But his gun, just take my word for it, his gun is pointed directly at there. The window is whole. His pistol's coming up. It's pointed directly horizontally at the window when the window shatters. So I expect that was his shot that shattered his window. But again, it doesn't necessarily matter. What counts is whether he had a reasonable perception that a shot had been fired at him. It's not necessary that a shot was actually fired at him. Okay, let's see if there's any Rumble rants. And that's it. All right, folks. So, relatively concise show today, just a little bit over an hour. Thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget about our upcoming Law Self-Defense Advanced class on Saturday, April 15th. Sign up this month and get 10% off your registration. Click over to that link to learn more, folks. I think if you take a look at that webpage, you'll see a compelling reason why you or someone you love should be joining us on Saturday, April 15th for this full day Law Self-Defense Advanced course. And don't forget, if you have a conflict on the 15th, you'll get access to the playback version of the course. So I would encourage you to sign up, even if you can't make it on that particular day. And that's at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. All right. And folks, I think that about wraps things up. If you carry a gun, own a gun, so you're hard to kill. That's why I own a gun, carry a gun, so that I'm hard to kill. So my family is hard to kill. Then you also owe it to your family to know the law so that you're hard to convict as well. Until we meet again, probably tomorrow, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for Law Self-Defense. Stay safe.